My name is Nathan Jones, and if you're new here, welcome. I like to talk about all things movies, specifically Blu-rays, and welcome to my film journey, where each week I have been covering the things that I have been watching and picking up for the past week. All things physical media, mostly movies, Blu-rays and 4Ks for the most part. Sometimes I get records and some books, and I'll usually cover that. But lately, I've been watching a lot, and I picked up a few titles this week, which we will cover. However, I have been watching a lot because this week, for some weird reason, was one of the longest weeks I've had in a long time, and at work especially. And so I wanted to shut my brain off, and I focused a lot on movies this week. So I have a lot of things to talk about today. One incredible box set to talk about, some werewolf movies, along with some other knickknacks, and maybe a new Predator movie that I'm really stoked. And I think probably you have seen it yet already, but if you haven't, you probably should check it out. But before we jump into all of that, I would love to know in the comment section down below what you have been checking out for these past week. Have you been saving up and trying to save up for some upcoming releases and some sales that are coming up? I know I am trying my best at doing that. I'm actually going to be going on a trip soon, and I'm excited to talk about that here in a few weeks as we continue with the film journey. So let me know in the comment section down below what you've been up to. So let's actually first jump into the titles that I picked up for the week. In fact, I got 3 titles. One of them I have seen before. I just upgraded it to 4K, and these are all from Orbit DVD, which is where I get most of my things from, especially just stateside, especially if it's a Region B release. A lot of the times this is where I get it, or from Diabolique DVD. But regardless, let's jump into the titles. The first one is actually from Janus Contemporary line, which is a side branch of the Criterion Collection. So this is a Region A release. But I am really curious about this. In fact, I was out in the wild in Kansas City a few weeks ago, and I noticed this, and I saw that, it was on the shelf, and I just read the back, and it was just super intriguing. And I'm talking about Room 666 and Room 999. So these are 2 films, one from 1982 from Wim Wenders, and one from 2023 from Lubna Playost. I probably said that name incorrectly. However, they both pose this question. I guess in 82, Wenders ask different filmmakers like Antonioni, Rainer Werner Fassbender, Jean-Luc Godard, Yilmaz Guni, Werner Herzog, Susan Seidelman, and Steven Spielberg. Man, I can't talk. Over in Cannes in 1982, he asked the question, is cinema a language about to get lost, an art about to die? And so posing that question, especially in 1982, was an interesting one, because I feel like the commercialization of films, especially in the 80s, was like about to explode, because you get in the 80s, you get a lot of commercial films, a lot of consumption, if you will, and then in 2023, almost 41 years later, we have Lubna Playoust's kind of version of this, as they pose the question to Wenders himself, along with contemporary filmmakers that are still alive today and still working right now: David Cronenberg, Claire Denis, Farhadi, James Gray, Lynn Ramsey, among others. And so asking the same exact question. So this is going to be an interesting watch, and I think it's going to be one of those things where it is definitely going to be a little bit more on the art house side of things, but at the same time, I just love seeing kind of the minds of the people making the films that we love. So this should be an interesting one, and if you read the back and were interested like me, check it out. And the next 2 titles I have are from the BFI, some Kurosawa upgrades, some Akira Kurosawa upgrades. One is actually a movie I have not seen before, and I don't think I've owned this on Blu-ray. I think it is in the Eclipse set in Criterion, but I'm talking about Stray Dog, which is the noir police drama that Akira Kurosawa put together with our buddy Toshiro Mifune, who is just one of the best actors, and we'll talk about him in just a second in another film. But this is a movie, like I said, I have not seen before. So this actually came out in 1949, so right at the transition into, I think, the samurai films that he would make. Of course, Rashomon came out a year after, but I don't really know much about this, but I love that image, and I just excited to watch this new restoration here. And then also there's a few different special features on here that are some new ones and some old ones as well. Very excited about this one. And the next film is actually a movie that I have watched before. I have this on the Criterion Collection, and it was actually one of my favorite discoveries when I finally watched it. And it's one of the most eerie films I think that Kurosawa has put together. It is made after Macbeth. which I know I'm not supposed to say, but I'm not making the film or, the play or whatever. And I'm talking about Throne of Blood. So this is the 4K from BFI. I just got this up. This just got released. I'm very, very excited about this. In fact, this is one of the most mad performances from Toshiro Mifune. Speaking of him again, right there. This is one of the last scenes. It's such a scary film in a way, but also just, if you know the story of Macbeth, it's a pretty mad story, right? And so seeing Akira Kurosawa kind of adapt this is really, really interesting. So I'm excited to watch this on 4K again. I loved it the first time. I have a feeling I'm going to love it again, and this is one of the most beautiful looking films I have seen. I remember watching it, and I remember images from it pretty explicitly in my mind. So seeing it upgraded to 4K is going to be a nice treat for me. All right, so transitioning away from the titles that I picked up to some things that I've watched. And the first one is actually 2 DVDs that I watched of some concert films that I've had in my collection for a long time. I've seen these multiple times, but I've just been in this headspace lately. Last week I was talking about Opeth, and there's Damnation behind me on the wall, which is one of my favorite records of all time, and is one of my favorite bands of all time. I just recently watched the Royal Albert Hall performance that I have on DVD. Well, I decided to watch other 2 DVDs right here. We have Lamentations, and we have the Roundhouse tapes. And so Lamentations is about Damnation and Deliverance, which is a double album that they started, I guess, made in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, and kind of showing the duality of what Opeth is all about, because they are a death metal outfit, progressive death metal outfit, that eventually transitioned into a prog rock outfit. And so it's really interesting seeing that dynamic, and they split it into these 2 records, and they did it masterfully. And this is the adaptation. This is the making of documentary plus going through the entire Damnation record on top of several other releases here from Deliverance, and a couple of things from other works that they've done, like Black Water Park. So this is a really, really great concert DVD, and also just showing the making of their duality, I suppose. The next DVD I watched is the Roundhouse tapes, which is kind of a recollection of what they had come from at the beginning. This has tracks from all the stuff that was around from the beginning of their band all the way up to when they got up to 2008, when they were about to, I think, make Watershed and kind of transition as a band into more of a prog rock band. But you have tracks like Ghost of Perdition, Face of Melinda, Black Water Park, Demon of the Fall. These are all really big Opeth songs, and accompanying with all these other tracks that are from each of the different albums, and kind of just showing a slice of what they're all about. But yeah, if you're interested in progressive rock and progressive metal, Opeth is the band, one of the bands to listen to, and these are really, really fun. Michael Ackerfeld is a really funny dude, especially when he comes to his banter on stage, and you'll see that as he's recording this and being awkward on stage as he normally is. And now let's transition into a film that I watched on Hulu. And in fact, I'm sure you probably have watched it too, especially if you're a fan of this franchise, Predator, Killer of Killers. Now, I was really excited about this. In fact, I heard about this, but I believe I heard about it a week, maybe before it came out, so that's kind of insane. I know there's a Predator movie coming out later on this year, which is made by the same people, and also who made Prey, Trachtenberg, and he made this as well, and I was really impressed by this. In fact, this is a story that is kind of about 3 different warriors throughout different periods on Earth's history, kind of the Viking era, the samurai feudalistic era, and World War I, and it brings them eventually all to the Predator world, and they have this battle royale. But I'll let it kind of unfold as you watch it, but really creative animation. I really, really enjoyed the different kind of Predator designs, because there are different Predators, there's different subspecies of them, the Yautja, which is what they're known as. It's really interesting to kind of just dive into stuff that is a little bit more like canon for like comic books and the extended storylines of Predator, and this is what it kind of showcased, and I really, really enjoyed it. And Predator is just one of my favorite franchises out there. Even the bad one, like The Predator, it's not my favorite film in the world, but I love the world it builds, and I definitely recommend people check it out. It's got some stunning animation, really fun acting, and also just kind of teamwork, and I think it's just a really fresh idea, and I think people need to check it out. It's definitely a 4 out of 5 right at the moment, but yeah, go check out that movie on Hulu, Killer of Killers. We might as well stay on topic with some science fiction or the horror side of it. I actually watched a lot of werewolf titles this week for some weird reason, and I don't exactly know why. I think it's because I got out my second sight Blu-rays and 4Ks that I hadn't seen before, or at least hadn't seen these editions of. And so the first one is actually one of the only trilogies that was put out from Second Sight, and that is the Ginger Snaps trilogy. And now this is a box set that I've only seen the first film in previously. I think I rented the DVD actually from the library a few years ago, and I quite enjoyed it. This kind of low-budget Canadian horror film about two girls kind of as they're growing up, dealing with adolescence, and also just dealing with these transformations. There's a lot of allegorical things going on, but it's also just a really great horror film that is empowering, especially with a lot of the young women that around this time period, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, things along those lines were really kind of kicking into gear. And this is another great trilogy here. In fact, I was actually very, very surprised watching this trilogy. So here is actually the box set. I'll just kind of cover that. I really like the glossy tone to it. There is the films themselves. So this trilogy has the Ginger Snaps trilogy right there, all three films. So the second one is actually, they're all starring the same people as well, which I think is really great to see, because I think this is a very collaborative effort for a lot of the people involved. I think there were three different directors, but they all work together for a lot of the things, or maybe they produced the other one's work, or got involved somehow with it. And the first movie is a movie that I revisited. Like I said, we have Ginger and her friend who are just kind of trying to survive school. And one night, as they were in the park, they hear some noises, and then they get attacked by a supposed wolf. And eventually you get a transformation going on for these girls as they are trying to get through that. So won't spoil too much about it, but it is a really fun, low budget, but also really, really well made horror film. I would honestly give that movie a 4 out of 5. It's just incredible. It's really fun. And also it's got this Canadian charm to it too, because I think at the time they were struggling quite a bit to get funds together, and also just shooting locations. I think they had to shoot this all over the place. So it was just really fun and exciting to kind of see that come to fruition. And Second Sight put together a lot of special features that I watched a lot of, just kind of the behind the scenes, and just the talking about how they crafted this entire film together, and then also the subsequent films. Now jumping into the second Ginger Snaps, this kind of picks up right as the first film leaves on a note that is pretty interesting, as Ginger is no longer, so I won't say much else besides that without saying it. And we have her friend who is, kind of taking on the mantle here as she's going through, losing her friend on top of losing herself to this strain of maybe becoming a werewolf. And it's really, really exciting. I think they upped the ante on this one quite a bit, and I like the gore a lot more in it, and I also just enjoy kind of just the fact that this is a sophomore release, and it felt like a continuation of the story, if you will, and it didn't feel at all rushed or anything along those lines. And it's really refreshing that it came out around the time that it did. So I'd give this movie a 3.5 out of 5. It's not necessarily the best. I think the first movie is a little bit better. However, it is a strong sequel. And speaking of strong sequels, and maybe the weakest in the trilogy, however, it is still a fascinating one. I really like the concept, is the third film in here. And the third one actually goes back in time to the 1700s, kind of around the fur trading in French Canadian wilderness, as we have some soldiers who are trapped in this camp, where we have these two young girls. We kind of get a little bit of a backstory as they're sent off on this mission, and their boat overturns, and they get lost in the cold Canadian wilderness, and stumble upon this fort. And this fort is being plagued and attacked at night by a bunch of wolves. And as you know, these are werewolves, and they are probably not welcome here, these two women, and it kind of goes into the tropes of, man versus woman, but also like that old adage of, if something's strange is happening, it's usually the sign of a witch or a woman doing something along those lines. So I like the way that they explore this. In fact, this entire trilogy is really, really cool. Just kind of looking at that exploration of, women femininity, power, the power of transformation, if you will, as you're becoming, I guess, a young girl into a woman, but also, with the allegory of a werewolf on top of a lot of other things. And there's a lot of power dynamics that are really interesting, and I think it's done pretty well. It's actually, I think, shot the same year that the second film came out, so it's really interesting that they came out around the same time period. I would give that one a 3 point, or maybe actually a 3 out of 5. It's definitely not the strongest, but this is a pretty strong trilogy nonetheless, and I definitely recommend people check it out. Next is a film that I have seen before. In fact, I've watched this multiple times. In fact, I think I watched this on TV when I was in the UK the second time in my hotel room, so it was really refreshing. I'm like, oh, I love this movie, and I'm talking about Dog Soldiers. This is the 4K from Second Sight, and this 4K looks very good. Now, if you are familiar with this film, Neil Marshall is the director. He made The Descent and several other films that are of varying quality, but Dog Soldiers is probably one of my favorite films of his, along with The Descent. And this movie is about a bunch of people in the military, kind of on a training operation in the wilderness. I want to say northern England, kind of near the border of Scotland. And anyway, here's the films, the Blu-ray and the 4K, the art cards, the amazing giant field notes right here, it's actually pretty exciting. I actually read that and quite enjoyed that. But anyway, these soldiers are sent on this mission, and then they eventually get trapped in this house where they're being bombarded and attacked by wolves. And these soldiers that are, werewolves that are like standing up and are really, really tough. And I actually really, really enjoy the practical effects of this film. In fact, I think this is probably one of the best werewolf movies of all time. I think it is just like, in practical terms, I think it just looks incredible. And I just love the frenetic energy of this movie. It definitely feels like one of the first films that Neil Marshall's made, right? Like, it's got like this chaotic energy to it where the camera work and the blood and the guts are kind of all over the place and in a really fun way. But at the same time, the creature design, the practical effects are just really, really incredible. And if you haven't seen this movie, you're in for a treat. It's one of the best werewolf movies out there. I would probably give this movie a 4 out of 5. It's not necessarily anything groundbreaking. It's not like an American Werewolf in London type of film, but it is still incredible, and I definitely recommend people check it out. I mean, this 4K also just looks really, really good. So great job on your work, Second Sight. Continuing to love your releases. All right, so the next film I watched is another streaming one. I'm just going to stick with the werewolf films. I actually watched the movie Howl, which was from 2015, and it is a British kind of low-budget horror film unlike where we watched Dog Soldiers, another British film that is really low budget, but with the practical effects, we have special effects more so in Howl, and the practical effects versus special effects might be something we need to talk about, because Howl, it has some really good moments, and I actually quite enjoy moments of the film itself, as these passengers who are set on this train get stuck in the middle of the night, and they get caught up in getting attacked by these unknown werewolves who also have really long legs and stand up really tall, but they look more like humans than they do wolves, which is kind of strange. So, but besides that, the practical and special effects are kind of all over the place. It's a mixed bag, I would say. The special effects, especially in the face, make it really hard to get lost or scared into the world. As brutal as they are and as vicious as they are, there's some off-kill screens that I think are really kind of wild. And then when they attack actual people and you see it definitely feels a little bit more, I guess, subtle, where the werewolves are a little bit like, yeah, but like they're not like actually attacking. They're just like, what do I do? What do I do? That threw me off a little bit because they were incredibly vicious off screen, and I would expect the same as we're seeing our protagonists get attacked by them one by one. Now, that's the other thing about this movie is necessarily the characters aren't the greatest, and so you don't fall in love with anyone necessarily, but it's still fun nonetheless. It's a good popcorn movie. I'd still give this movie like a 3 out of 5. It's one that I would recommend people check out if you're a fan of werewolf films and just horror in general. It's just a fun movie with some kind of weak practical effects, but besides that, it's fun. All right, so transitioning away from the werewolf films that I watched are some oddball titles that I watched just randomly this week. Another one that I watched on streaming was one of the Untold Stories, Shooting Guards. Now, Untold is a documentary series that Netflix puts out. It's very much like ESPN's 30 for 30. So if you're interested in like sports documentaries, that is an interesting documentary series, and they're all individual stories. Now, Shooting Guards is about Javaris Crittenton and Gilbert Arenas, who are former NBA players who got caught up in a gun scandal where they pulled guns on each other in the locker room, eventually leading Crittenton to actually commit a crime and a murder later on, and that was like that locker room incident was the catalyst for it. So it's a really shocking documentary because of that fact, and it kind of echoes to why the league right now is like so determined to like get guns away from it. I mean, if you are following along with the NBA, you understand like Ja Morant's situation, which can be a little ridiculous, but you know. Regardless, like guns are serious, and it can lead to some really scary, and it can lead to to deaths. And so it is definitely something that I find very interesting because as somebody who watches some of Gilbert Arenas' show, he is still very, very active in the NBA world, not necessarily playing, but in the commentating space. This is a different side of him that I didn't expect, and so seeing that unfold was something really interesting, and I definitely recommend people check it out. I would recommend this if you are a fan of basketball. Otherwise, I probably would say skip it. It's definitely like a 2.5 out of 5. It's nothing too special, but it is definitely something that has real-world consequences on it, and is definitely worth your time if you're a fan of the sport. Next, let's actually transition to a project that I'll cover a little bit later as these things progress, but I'll actually cover this more in depth on that podcast. But we're going to be talking about David Cronenberg and his early works right here. So I actually was able to watch these 4 films. 2 of them are short films. 2 of them are short films, but are not necessarily like their feature length. But regardless, this has Transfer, From the Drain, Stereo, and Crimes of the Future. Not the 2023 Crimes of the Future, but from the early 70s. And so this actually came out in 1966, 67, 69, and 70, respectively. And these are really interesting releases. In fact, David Cronenberg comes from a very interesting point, especially this early work of his career as he was this science major, kind of transitioning into literature and English and into the arts, obviously into filmmaking, and seeing that unfold with the things that were going on in the late 60s, but also in Canada at the time, because Canada really did not have a budget when it comes to filmmaking or like just much support in general. And so these are some burgeoning kind of ideas into kind of where Cronenberg would eventually go into more body horror type of films. But let's talk about the films themselves. First, we have Transfer, which is really just a student film, it feels like, of a psychiatrist and their student who are out in the middle of this snowy field having this really absurd conversation. And it's really, really short. It's like, I think, 7 minutes long, but regardless, it's really tongue-in-cheek, I feel like, but also very Shakespearean, at least very try-hard in a dramatization type of role. But you can definitely tell these are student actors who are eventually going to try to get into the business a little bit. But it's a fun concept. It's kind of absurd. 7 minutes is a perfect length. I definitely recommend check that out. I think it's probably on YouTube somewhere, but it's still it's actually kind of a fun kind of first short film that he made. Now the next one is actually probably my favorite of this entire set, and that is From the Drain, another short film. This is, I think, about 11 or 12 minutes long, and it is about soldiers kind of in a future war, this kind of post-apocalyptic war, but they're set in a bathtub, and these 2 soldiers are talking about various things going on the outside, and eventually it leads to there is a creature at the end of the tub, down in the drain, and so that drain is constantly viewed and constantly shot. I think it's really interesting seeing Cronenberg's kind of transition to like, hey, let's fix this in a room, let's make this a little bit horrific, and there might be some kind of monster lurking in the drain itself, along with this pretty absurdist kind of conversation between these two individuals. And it's fun, and there is actually some really cool creature work, I suppose, a little bit, with some plant vine like stuff, and I quite enjoyed it. In fact, it's probably the best thing about this set, because now we're going to go into the short long films, right? The feature films that are about an hour long each, and these are technically his first films. So Stereo came out in 1969. It is definitely a very dry, cut and paste, almost monochromatic, black and white film about these students who are at a university, who are experimenting the psychiatric, I guess what's the word right here, where they're telepathically, making love with each other and going through these experiments together. So it's all done through like a narration over the fact. And so it's kind of dry in that sense, where you can see some of the visuals be really kind of interesting, but it is really long, and definitely very dull. But at the same time, the narration, the way it's kind of panned out, I think is a little satirical, but regardless, it is still a film that is worth, I think, checking out at least once, and that maybe just one and done type of film. I would give this movie like a 2.5 out of 5. It's definitely, like I said, it feels like a student film. There's some really, really interesting shots. I think that Cronenberg, was able to utilize the space, the university that he was shooting on, is done really, really well. There's a couple of scenes that I actually quite remember. They're quite imprintable in the mind and in the memory. So there's definitely some interesting things, and a lot to do with the body, which he eventually obviously would get into. And the last film on here is probably my least favorite of the set, and that is Crimes of the Future, that came out in 1970. I think he made this around the same exact time as Stereo. I think he shot these back to back, or at least kind of mixed up, and but this is in color, and another university campus. I don't know if it's the same exact university that he shot this on, but it is about this doctor in this post-apocalyptic world where women have become infertile and have died off from this disease that's like really kind of disgusting, a very foamy, like kind of shaving cream type of thing that comes out of their orifices and kills them. And it's the men who are left behind who have to deal with this. It feels a lot like this weird post-apocalyptic world in a university, but it's done very dryly. Again, a very dry kind of representation. I would honestly, in a very, very boring sense, kind of compare it to A Clockwork Orange, in that sense, where it's this futuristic world where things are being said really strangely, and at the same time, where Clockwork Orange is actually fascinating, this one not so much. In fact, there's actually a scene at the end of this film, going back to women and how they have been dying off, that is pretty disturbing, especially watching this, I guess in a modern lens, and honestly kind of damns the film a little bit for me. But I do have a lot more thoughts on all four of these films in a podcast that I'll be talking about here in a bit. And regardless of me not enjoying some of it, I still enjoyed this journey, and I'm excited to talk more about it in the future. Now, next is a film that I watched from a legendary duo from England, and this is actually where I actually got this on my trip the last time I went over, and I've been wanting to watch this for a bit. And this is from the Studio Canal, and that is The Small Black Room from Powell and Pressburger. Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, this amazing duo of these talents of these directors. But we have David Farrar, we have Kathleen Byron, and Jack Hawkins starring in this adaptation of Nigel Balchin's novel. But this is about a World War II love triangle between those characters, and about this man who is superior in a lot of ways, but in his manhood, and as he falls in love with this woman who, honestly, it's a little taboo to fall in love with because she's betrothed to another. this becomes this inferiority complex between our main character here, and we see his, kind of, I guess, as the war is going on, you see these power dynamics happen back and forth. The dialogue is very, very sharp. It's very, very intense. Obviously, with directors like Powell and Pressburger, you're in for a treat, especially when it comes to the visual side of it as well. But it's just this really tight English film. It came out in 1949. Seems to be one of the growing years for some of the best films ever. But yeah, this is definitely a movie I'd recommend people check out. It's definitely one of the underseen films, I think, from these guys. I would give it a 4 out of 5. It's definitely interesting and a fascinating one, and a watch that I think people should check out. And the last film I watched before we jump into the Columbia Classics Volume 5 set is a film that I just watched, and one that I am going to think about for a long time. And it is Cemetery of Splendor. And this is directed by Apichatpong. I'm not going to say his last name. I think he goes by Joe and for nicknames for people because of his long name. So this director is somebody where I'm really fascinated by his work. And I've actually seen a little bit of Memoria, which is the film he made most recently with Tilda Swinton. And I haven't talked about it much because I did fall asleep watching it. However, it was a really... it's not because it was boring, it's because of the time of the day that I watched the film at. But at the same time, I find it kind of fascinating because he does make very transcendental types of films, so they are very slow. There's not much of a plot necessarily with the types of films that I've seen from this director, and at the same time, they're very dreamlike, or at least you kind of get inspired by the everydayness of what's going on. Now, this has some fantastical elements in it. So Cemetery of Splendor is about this I guess school area set around a cemetery, but also there's these soldiers that keep falling asleep, and they stay asleep in this weird dreamlike coma state, and they're being taken care of by this woman, and this woman is actually going around kind of doing her own thing. She used to work at the school, and she's also taking care of these soldiers as they are, I guess, just monitoring the situation of what's going on. But this film, honestly, it's probably not best to explain it. It's best to watch it. It's a movie that is incredibly visual. It's incredibly patient and meandering, but in a really positive light. It's a movie that is like a breath of fresh air in a way, where you can almost meditate with this movie. There are some really funny moments in it, of course. It's like a slice of life type of film, and I think it's definitely meant for people who are into those types of films. But it's definitely a hard recommendation for a lot of people. But for me, and at this time in my life, or at least the time I watched this, I was very sucked into the world, and I'm kind of blown away by it. I'd give this movie a 4.5 out of 5. I could easily see this potentially becoming a 5 out of 5 for me one day, but this is a movie that really spoke to me, and really I'm just going to be pondering about for a long, long time. So yeah, Apichatpong's Cemetery of Splendor, incredible film. This is the Region B release I got when I was over in the UK, just like when I got The Small Black Room. So happy I finally watched this movie. This movie is going to sit with me for a long time. All right, so now let's talk about the last Columbia Classics set that has come out, and I'm talking about Columbia Classics Volume 5, and this is the purple, regal look, and actually it has a new slick cover to it. I really love these sets. As you open them up, there are the titles that they are usually in here in the box, and there's a booklet that comes with it. So with this particular set, we are seeing the films All the King's Men, On the Waterfront, A Man for All Seasons, Tootsie, The Age of Innocence, and Little Women from 2019. And all of these movies are pretty damn good, and that's the reason why they're in these set. And like I said, this box set just feels really nice, and I actually like the way they made this. Now, with all these sets, they always come with a booklet right here, which kind of covers all of the films in here. And now I will say I have not read this yet because I've been watching other things. As you can tell, I just opened that up, and you can tell it's very fresh when you're opening up that crisp paper. So maybe that's a downfall to this, is maybe the way that it is. It also has a bonus disc in here. I believe there are 6 titles in here, I think from the 30s and 40s. I want to say. I haven't seen them yet. I will probably cover them next week. So I'm not completely done with this set. But I've loved the special features on all of the Columbia Classic sets, and I feel like that's where like the price point comes from, is because they put all these incredible 4Ks out and they upgrade them incredibly, and then they always have this really nice surprise. So let's actually go in chronological order now to the first title, All the King's Men, which came out in 1949, which seems to be a theme of this episode for some weird reason. This actually, it was the winner of 3 Academy Awards that came out that year, and this is actually based on a novel a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel from Robert Penn Warren, All the King's Men, which is based on the same name. And this is actually about the inspiration of Southern bigwig Huey Pierce Long, the infamous Kingfish, who was Louisiana's governor and one-time senator. Now, this movie is definitely got some Southern things going on that are definitely not all right in the contemporary sense, but at least in the kind of almost weirdly Lincoln Douglas kind of debate style that used to be a lot more prevalent before television became a really big deal in the 60s, and we would be constantly now we're just obsessed with whatever president is doing what now. But during this time period, politics were a lot different, and so at least in the ways that we consumed or like interacted with them. But there's some schemy, smarmy people in this particular film, and I really like it as we are seeing a guy trying to take him down, pretty much, just trying to, a journalist trying to understand a little bit more about the situation, and like this kind of xenophobic, and there's some really scary imagery going on where you get some of these rallies that are a little bit too close to home right now with what's going on in the world today. So the word Kingsmen in here is a little strange to be putting out at this current time. I'll leave it at that, but this movie is a strong 4 out of 5. I definitely recommend people check it out if you've not seen it before. It's a great sign of the time that this came out, and is contemporarily relevant today. Next is a legendary film that is a movie that it was one of my first Criterion releases that I picked up, and I'm talking about On the Waterfront. Marlon Brando's amazing performance, probably the best performance he's done, in my opinion, is this film. And this is about some dockside workers in a union, kind of union busting and kind of taking out the tyrants at the top. Another theme here with what's going on in the world today a little bit. But anyway, this actually has a 3-disc set, which is kind of insane because there's these different presentations of the film. I was actually able to watch the disc 1, which is the 166:1 presentation of the film, but there's an alternate 137:1, and disc 3 has 185:1. So I guess depending on how you watched it, I think 161 or 66 is the kind of theatrical release, and so that's the one I stuck with. So it's really interesting to have 3 4K discs here, and also a Blu-ray disc as well that has a bunch of special features, which I did not watch, I will admit. However, this was a nice, refreshing film to kind of revisit, because like I said, I got this a long time ago as one of my first Criterion releases, and one that just really impressed me by just the writing and also just the acting of the people involved, especially Marlon Brando, of course, as we eventually get to the final scene, which is this iconic thing that will stick into your mind. It's one of the most memorable, I think, scenes from classic Hollywood, and definitely a shift of the time, as in 1954, things were definitely switching around a little bit. So On the Waterfront, one of the best films of all time. I'd give this a 5 out of 5. That's how incredible this movie is. It's that important for various reasons, but definitely check this movie out if you've not seen it. The 4K looks damn good. All right, so now let's jump to 1966, to the Best Picture winner of that year, although it probably should have been Virginia Woolf. Let's talk about A Man for All Seasons. This British epic of a film, more of a talkie, if you will, and not so much in terms of scale, because this movie reminds me a lot of like Spartacus, but not so much on the action side, more in the court side of things. But this is about a Roman chancellor right here, Sir Thomas More, Roman Catholic chancellor, who is battling King Henry VIII, who is played by Robert Shaw. So we have Paul Scofield versus Robert Shaw here, and this battle of will, power, and duel, and then also just really important transitionary time for England in general, because as they were kind of backing out of the Roman Catholic Church, jumping into the Church of England, is a very important time for English history. So it is actually really a revelatory type of film. What's really interesting here is that Fred Zimmerman does a really good job of crafting this script that is really intriguing as they're battling back and forth. The other thing too here is something that I really enjoyed was seeing like Orson Welles here briefly. We also have John Hurt in one of his first roles, and he's definitely a little smarmy in this, but I'm obviously a big John Hurt fan, thinking of like Watership Down and whatnot. But this is just a really interesting English period piece. It's definitely not for everybody. It's definitely a little dry, I would argue, if you are not into those things. And so if you're not interested in that, I would definitely say pass. But if you are interested in it, it's a masterclass in that. I'd give this a 4 out of 5. Another film that is really, really strong and really, really revelatory film to what's going on to power today. That's, I guess, the theme of this box set. All right, so the next film is a film from 1982, more of a lighthearted film, if you will, but it's definitely a strong one nonetheless, and that is Tootsie right here. Dustin Hoffman playing this iconic role where he is disguised as a woman, trying to get understanding or a second chance at something that he really mucked up at the beginning, and fall back in love, and also get back his job. And this is really interesting. This predates Miss Doubtfire. Now, obviously, this comes on the heels of something like Some Like It Hot, and so you have movies like this where we have I guess men taking on the women role, but like it's interesting to see all those different films kind of take the different approaches to that and what that looks like. And Tootsie is definitely more on the funny / serious side of it, and definitely where people have this kind of idea of who you are, and obviously putting on something else and being a different person, and then finally the revelation being like, hey, this has been me the whole time. It kind of illuminates into that a way that is wakes people up, I suppose. But it's still relevant to today, and it's got this screwball comedy to it that is just a delight to go to. I'd give this movie a 4 out of 5. It's definitely not Some Like It Hot, but it's definitely along the same trajectory of a fun time. And I definitely recommend people check out Tootsie. All right, so the next film I have here is one of Scorsese's films, one of them that I think a lot of people either really love or they just maybe underappreciated or not seen enough, and that is The Age of Innocence from 1993. This is starring the one and only Daniel Day-Lewis. We have Michelle Pfeiffer and we have Winona Ryder, all an incredible ensemble cast here as they kind of navigate New England society, people who are in love, and out of love, or this scorned love, if you will. I got Daniel Day-Lewis's character, who is married to Winona Ryder's character, and definitely is not always in love with her, but is definitely fascinated and wants to be. And then he finds his perfect match in Michelle Pfeiffer, but she is incredibly, strong and independent in that way, and definitely is not giving him a chance. So it's definitely a tale of that kind of love triangle here a little bit, and seeing kind of the inconsequence of trying to do something different. So it's an interesting title, and it's beautifully shot. I think it's one of the most beautifully shot films that Scorsese's ever made, and I think it was actually made for his father. He kind of gave a little note at the end. This was for him, and I love this period piece, and it's a movie that I think I've learned over the years, because I have the Criterion edition of this as well. I've learned to like this a lot more as subsequent viewings, and so it's a movie that it will bring a tear to your eyes, but it's a beautiful one, and definitely one that I recommend people check out. I'd probably give this a 4.5 out of 5. It's a movie that is an incredible period piece with incredible performances and stunning set designs. So check this movie out if you've not seen it. And the last film I want to talk about is one that probably feels like a Christmas movie, if you will, and this is actually, I think, the 4th adaptation of it from 2019. We're talking about Greta Gerwig's Little Women. Greta Gerwig is on a roll, by the way, one of the best directors of our time right now. But there's Saoirse Ronan, who plays one of the 4 sisters in here, Emma Watson. We have Florence Pugh and Eliza Scanlon, who are also the other sisters, and their mother is Laura Dern, and that cast right there is just incredible alone. But then you also have Timothée Chalamet, who is in here as kind of the love interest / friend of Saoirse Ronan, another person very much like Michelle Pfeiffer's character in the last film we just talked about, very much wants to be kind of left alone and is kind of caught in this crossfire of will she, won't she, but like her own independence is really, really important to her. But besides that, we also have Bob Odenkirk, who is her father, Lewis Garl, Chris Cooper, James Norton, Tracy Lewis. There's so many people in here in this delightful film. It's also incredibly sad and incredibly heartfelt, and it is a beautiful one. It's one of, like, I think out of all the things that I just talked about, it's got the best soundtrack. Age of Innocence and this probably have the best soundtrack, but I was like really invested in the soundtrack on this one, and I was almost to tears just rewatching this, because I have seen this before. I watched it in theaters when it came out. I believe I watched this with my mom, and I just remember having such a good time watching it. And seeing Greta Gerwig's vision of these sisters in this I guess story about these four women growing up in a time that didn't really accept them for what they were is really interesting and fascinating, because all these sisters go in different directions. One wants to be a writer. We have Saoirse Ronan, who is our mostly main character, who is the one who wants to be a writer. One who kind of follows in her footsteps, with Florence Pugh kind of being at her heels the whole time. Gets an opportunity that she probably deserved, but it's interesting to kind of see that dynamic. Emma Watson falls in love with another young man and kind of goes in that trajectory. And their youngest sister is as a mother, I guess a mother's child, who's constantly with Laura Dern and wants to be with her. And I won't get too much into the story itself, but it's a charming film. It's a very, very charming film with an exquisite soundtrack, brilliant acting. You'll laugh, you'll cry, all the emotions. It's the recipe for a 5 out of 5. This movie is just incredible, and I think I'm gonna love it more and more as I get older. With that being said, that's all the things that I've watched for the week. Sorry if I went too long on some, and I've had some really revelatory experiences like Little Women, Cemetery of Splendor. These movies are going to stay with me for a long, long time. Well, that wraps it up for today, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Hope you like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. I'm not jonesing around.